Hey everyone, what is going on? What is going on? Welcome to That Man Show. Good evening to you. My name is Curtis Brooks. I am your host and executive coach. I help high achieving men master the art of integrated leadership and authentic masculine presence. Guys, we've got a great show for you this evening. Better yet, a great discussion. We're talking about why healing should be part of your leadership journey. Now, that sounds like a very simple question, and in most cases, it is a very simple question. But trust me, there's more to it. We're going to dive more into that in just a little bit here. But before we get started, I'd like to let you know that we're streaming to multiple platforms. So I tried to kind of get this down to the simplest form so I don't have to do a lot of talking about it. So here it is on the screen here. So you see that I'm here on LinkedIn, which is our primary live streaming platform. And we're also on Substack at Curtis Brooks and over on YouTube at Men's Life Coaching. So check us out there over on YouTube. And also, before we get started here, lastly, we have a 30-day men's challenge just taking place at the link there on the screen. That's bit.ly/United Impact Challenge, guys. Check it out. There are only 50 seats available for this challenge, guys. You need to be there. You don't want to miss it, guys. So it's going to change your bottom line. It's going to change your life. Just in many different areas that you haven't even thought about or even haven't even decided to go there. But nevertheless, it's going to be good for you to be a part of this challenge. So again, check it out at bit.ly/United Impact Challenge there on the screen. So again, we got a great show for you. We're talking about, one second here, why healing should be part of your leadership journey. Now, I started off saying that this sounds like a simple, that's easy. You should know. We should know those things. But the reality of it is that we oftentimes, as leaders, we overshoot this. This is an oversight. And I'll tell you why it's an oversight. Because the bulk of what we have learned, or what we call leadership, it comes out of the space or place from that barbaric mentality. And so naturally, and this is just my thought, and I would imagine a lot of you would partner with me on this, but the bulk of the beginnings for, especially here in the States and in most countries, have been from this barbaric mentality, such as the Romans. You may have heard me talk about that in the past, but I even had to look back further and say, hey, this is well before the Romans. And it was just a matter of men wanting to be in control. And however they apprehended that control or took control, those were the measures in most cases. And so, and what we're dealing with now is the leadership, or at least the birthing of that is what we call the leadership. Again, there's obviously different styles of leadership, or different methods or ideas in regards to how leadership works from one person to the other. But the birthing of leadership was born out of this barbaric mentality, this controlling mentality. And so what happens now? We end up having wounded leaders. And it's only been within the last, I don't have the stats here for that, but and this is just kind of off the top of my head here, but it's only been within the last, I would say, maybe 15, 20 years that leaders have been talking more about the holistic perspective in healing. And again, oftentimes these have just been conversations, unfortunately. And so what happens is that they end up going back to that model that they were all too familiar with. And so what happens is that we have wounded leaders. And that is the unfortunate thing about leadership, again, coming out of this model. And as I stated before, it's only been about 15 to 20 years that there's been a concern more so in regards to the leadership styles, because it was just what they did. It's what we've known as leadership. And so naturally, we operated from that space, and that space was more of a scientific perspective in regards to this is how you control the crowds, this is how you control people, and it was more the again, it was the brute force mentality in regards to how we dealt with people. And it is so unfortunate, because what happens is that you have wounded leaders. You have leaders who have not even begun to think about this space and how they've been leading, or how their leadership has affected people. It's all like a parent, be it a mom or dad, as a parent, where, well, just take myself an example. With a baby girl who's 2 years old now, and I have an older son, I've had to look at how I have parented. And in some ways, or in a lot of ways, it just doesn't work anymore. And it's not to blame my mom or my father, but it is to understand that how we teach things and how we go about certain things, these things are oftentimes they change. They change. And it is the same with leadership. The old model or modules of leadership, how we confront leadership, has changed. And unfortunately, the leaders have not changed. And so what happens, as I mentioned before, we have leaders who are wounded. And the leaders end up wounding, they're wounded first and foremost, but they end up wounding their subordinates, their team members. The team members end up having a psychological effect, or having to deal with the absence of whatever the leader may be missing, because he or she is wounded. So I got a question for you. How many of you would openly agree to work with a wounded leader? How many of you would openly agree to work with a wounded leader? Most of us wouldn't sign up for that. But the reality of it is that many of us have worked with wounded leaders. And yet another question, how many of you are the wounded leader? Now, leadership is not just about leading an organization. And commonly that's what how we perceive leadership. Leadership is also leading your homes. And I believe this is the first steps to leadership. Learning how to lead is leading our homes. And oftentimes we forego that, or forsaken that, looking at being a leader from from that place of that fundamental place from home. We oftentimes forsaken those areas, and we can go out trying to lead organizations because various reasons. But nevertheless, when leaders lead out of a wounded place, their decision making is impacted. I'm looking at my notes here too. So their judgment is impaired. And oftentimes, men, a lot of times we can look at, hey, this leadership thing, I can just do this thing with my eyes closed. But in reality, from a wounded leader, a man that is wounded, oftentimes his judgment is impaired. And because his judgment is impaired, he's in most cases not as confident as he used to be, or as he was at a particular time. Now, this confidence in most cases, or even with the impaired judgment, impaired vision, so to speak, it's eroding, and it doesn't typically happen just right away. He's making bad decisions. It typically is eroding. A little piece here, a little piece there, and yet another larger piece here, and yet a smaller piece there. And so what happens is that as leaders, when we're leading from a wounded space, not just our organizations, not looking at it from a professional space, but even in a personal space, trying to lead our homes, being a father to our children, being a husband to our wife. When we're leading from a wounded space and trying to do life from a wounded space, we in fact are not doing life. It can feel like we're doing life and being in a sense where we can find ourselves feeling like we're imprisoned, because that's what's happening with the man that's wounded. His vision is impaired. His vision is impaired because he's wounded. He can't make the proper judgment. And in most cases, because he's fearful of making the wrong judgment, he's walking in fear. And let's face it, most of us as men, we wear the mask well. Most of us as men, we wear the mask well. And so what happens is that we're not going to come out and say, oh, I'm fearful. In most cases, we won't. But what happens is that we find ourselves reluctant to make those decisions in a timely fashion. We find ourselves second guessing ourselves without the clarity that we once were part of, without the clarity that we once understood. Because clarity is not just vision or sight with your eyes. Clarity is understanding. Clarity is being able to view something 10, 11 steps ahead before it happens. And so for the wounded leader, he is often stuck in his space. And not to mention, he is, in most cases, emotionally reactive in his emotions. He's got a lot on his plate. He's overwhelmed because his wound. Hey, Preston, thank you for joining over there on Substack. He's wounded. And because he's wounded, he's uncomfortable. He doesn't carry the same confidence that he once exuded. He's uncertain about himself. And so here's the thing. When we as men are uncomfortable and don't have it figured out here and in here, it shows up in our decision making. It shows up as us being or not being a safe place. It shows up with us being frustrated. It shows up with us being a short fuse. It shows up with us being unpredictable. It shows up with us being reactive rather than taking a moment to think about what needs to be done. It shows us where we're not as sharp as we used to be. Now, this is the wounded leader. And for us men, we've got to come to a place where we're recognizing that we're the wounded leader. Now, it's easy for us a lot of times to recognize that, hey, that boss of mine for 10 years ago, or that current boss of mine, he's really got a chip on his shoulder, or whatever the case might be. Now, it's easy for us to recognize that because we know what the chaos looks like. We know what the mayhem and all the just the things that are out of order. We know what it feels like. But the reality is that when we are in this space or these conditions for an extended period of time, we ourselves become that. And this is the work that many of us as men are missing. We become the very thing, we become the chaos around us. We become the confusion. We become the very thing that our boss perhaps is that wounded leader. In most cases, we become him because the actions and the behaviors will play out. They will show up. Not to mention the stuff that we're carrying also, dealing with our own personal stuff. So the wounded leader has a tendency to spill on everything that he touches. And here's the thing, oftentimes we as people, we can find ourselves wanting to separate these things. It's so difficult to separate them. What's done in the dark comes to the light, and it's not necessary in the way that I'm saying it, or in the context I'm saying this, is not to be said in a way where this leader is doing something conniving or sneaky. But the reality of it is that if we're not, as leaders, if we're not taking care of those things that are coming up, that are showing up, and in most cases those things show up well before we start leading people. In most cases, those things are showing up at home as we are talking with our wife, dealing with our children. So in most cases, those things are showing up well before we begin to, or before we're placed in a position of leading people. So what happens is that the organization or the school qualifies us in most cases through a certificate or diploma or just overly expensive education or amounts of money you may have spent on education, educating yourself, become this leader. So someone crowns us the leader at some point. But the reality, separate from fiction, is that many of us, as I kind of stated earlier, are so far away from knowing thyself. The leadership model of today has taken up residence on the inside of us. And so our mindset sees leadership as this brute force in dealing with people. Our mindset, or the societal view of leadership, says that you just go in and take it. You just go in and do what you're supposed to be doing. Your employees will do what they're supposed to be doing, or if not, you fire them. And it sounds cut and dry, but the reality of it is that that's not a leader. I think in the Bible, Jesus shows us a perfect example of a leader. The man who decides to look at the plank in his own eye before taking the speck out of his brother's eye. And oftentimes as leaders, we can find ourselves in a space where we have the answers. We're wanting to judge a situation. We're wanting to fix things. But if your leadership style is the result of people being hurt, being destroyed, you're destroying your team members, and the way of leadership, or this leadership model or concept that's out there, that's not leadership. That's not leadership. And I think it causes for us to, as men, and just even outside of this model that we have known what as leadership. Obviously, there's different styles of leadership, but nevertheless, the bulk of the different styles of leadership were birthed out of this brute force mentality. And in most cases, we offer variations of that depending on who you're talking to. But there's so many variations of these different styles of leadership that you can absolutely get lost in it. Leadership is a heart matter. It's a moral obligation. The erosion of trust, I kind of mentioned this earlier in regards to leadership. Trust is lost. What was the predictable leader at a certain time, or maybe months ago, years ago, that trust is completely lost because that leader is now unpredictable, all because he's wounded. And when he's wounded, his mind is all over the place, even if he appears to be calm as a cucumber, just at ease. But if he's making irrational decisions, this is what happens. This is part of the wounded leader. He begins to make irrational decisions. Hey, Zakia, thank you for joining over there on LinkedIn. I appreciate you. Thank you. Thank you. So it is important to understand that regardless of our upbringings, regardless of our style of leadership, if your style of leadership is crushing your team members, at some point, we've got to question what we've been eating off of. We've got to question the value of what we've been educated in, the value of what we've been given. And it can be difficult, possibly, to question that diploma or the business school, that top-notch business school in regards to dealing with leadership. You spent a fortune on that schooling, that education. I would imagine it could be difficult. But as a result, if you've got half of a remedy, half of a solution for a problem that your team members are dealing with, that's not the solution. That's not the remedy. So it is cause to go back to the drawing board. Stifle innovation, a culture of fear, discouraging creativity and risk taking, leading to stagnation. The interesting thing about leadership from a healthy space is that there's a flow that's permitted. From a healthy space, there's a flow that's permitted. And when that flow is interrupted, the leader has to begin to ask those questions. Those questions might look like, wow, why do I feel this way? That question might sound like what he did or what she said, that triggered me. Now, it's important to know that, to understand that, because when we're talking about leadership, we're talking about a flow. And when that flow is interrupted in terms of the wounded leader, we get backed up. There's a backup. there's a congestion, traffic congestion here and here. The leader is going through different things. Outwardly, he may not look like he's being challenged with certain things, but when he's wounded, his creativity is stifled. This is part of the flow now, ladies and gentlemen. So when you hear people say, I'm not very creative, to me, a lot of times interesting, because we're all creative. Every last one of us are creative. Maybe some more than others, because here's the thing, even in leadership, we have to be prepared to think ourselves out of some stuff. And from the wounded leader perspective, for the man who's wounded, it becomes difficult for him to be creative because he is now stagnated. The flow has been interrupted. I know this is overly simplified, but understand it, please. Please get this. When the flow is interrupted, his creativity, unseen options are minimized. It's hard for him to see his way out of certain situations. And so because he cannot see, or the clarity that once was there, because he can't see anymore, he can't, in most cases, he's without the understanding as well. And because he's without the understanding, it puts him in a place of being fearful to make certain decisions. Guys, this is just a big circle. And when the flow is interrupted, it not only affects him, the leader, but it also affects and stagnates his team members. The psychological safety that the team members were once able to take part in, it's been cut off now. All roads have been blocked. So it is important to understand that from the space of the wounded leader, the question, or at least the question that the title of the show, why healing should be part of your leadership journey. It absolutely sounds like it's, Curtis, that's pretty basic. But again, it's a lot more to it. A lot more to it. Because for most of us, we were born into this chaos. We're born into this chaos, ladies and gentlemen. And if you can understand it from that perspective, that in most cases, the leader who taught you how to be a leader, he was dealing with stuff too. She was dealing with stuff too. So you've got hurt people trying to help people, or at least believing in their own minds that they're separating the two. When in fact, wounded leaders, everything that they touch is tainted. There's been times where me and my wife have had disagreements on certain things. And I've said to myself, well, okay, whatever, just go about my business. And I can act like I'm not affected, act stoic, in front of her, act like I'm not bothered by it. But what commonly happens is that I might end up slamming something on the counter. I might end up slamming a cabinet door or drawer. I might end up being snappy towards her for something. But at the same time, here I was trying to separate the two. And that's oftentimes what we do as leaders. We can find ourselves trying to separate the two. And I know this is just from a personal perspective, but we do the same thing even as leaders of organizations. We can find ourselves perhaps dealing with a situation from a personal level, something that took place at home or even with the kids. And now you're on the job, and it's inevitable that one of your team members or someone, perhaps not part of your team, someone's going to say something that's going to trigger perhaps that conversation that you and your spouse had, or a conversation that you and your child may have had. Someone's going to trigger that. And now as leaders, we get to determine and figure out how we're going to respond. But again, the leader who's wounded, ideally, perhaps not in all cases, but for the most part, he will respond from a tainted perspective. Perhaps the question that he or she is being asked of is something completely unrelated to what he's going through. But what he hears is perfectly in line with the conversation that he may have had last night with his spouse or his child. That's what he hears. That's how his mind has shaped it. But again, the ask that his team member maybe has come to him for is completely separate and different. And now the team member is looking like, wow, where did that come from? So wounded leaders have a tendency, in most cases, to spill over into the lives of their team members. They have a tendency to crush their team members. They have a tendency to make their team members lose hope, lose sight of life in instances, because we spend so much time at work. We spend so much time at work. Now, we don't want to keep going on and on about this wounded leader. And he's not a horrible person. He's not a horrible person. Because let's face it, the question that I asked earlier at the start of the conversation, or at least a couple of questions I asked, was how many of you would openly agree to work with a wounded leader? The other half of that question was, or is, how many of you are the wounded leader? So whether you're leading an organization or whether you're leading from a leader in your home, a wounded leader is a wounded leader. Wounded leaders at home lead organizations wounded from that same position. Wounded leaders who are leading organizations go home and lead wounded homes. So at some point, the cycle has to stop. The hope is that it has to stop. And that's where we get into the shift to healing. That's where the leader gets into that space, or at least comes to that space where he is not as reactive anymore. He is taking the pause, pausing for the cause. He is considering, he is pausing and actually listening, because oftentimes that wounded leader, again, because he is dealing with the frustration of losing direction, feeling like he's losing direction because of the wounds, because he's feeling stagnated. He's not feeling very productive. He doesn't really see himself moving anywhere on the inside, or the progress. And so that frustration from the wounded leader is often, again, shared with his team members. But now he has decided to say, I'm going to do something about it. He's pausing for the cause. He's listening to what is actually being said. Because remember, the wounded leader, oftentimes, when we're dealing with something, we'll hear something to fit the very narrative of the story that we were dealing with, maybe prior to getting to work, maybe last night or on the way to work. So that wounded leader is now pausing for the cause. He's listening and hearing what is actually being said rather than the story to fit the narrative that he has in his own mind. The pause is absolutely very powerful, ladies and gentlemen. I practiced the pause. Absolutely. I practiced the pause for sure. Healing enables a fundamental shift to the leader's operating system. And I've talked about this in a previous conversation in regards to that operating system being our belief system. And a lot of what we have known to do, a lot of times have just been reactive. Even as it comes to where we, a lot of times as parents, are instructing our children. We tell our children what to do, how to do certain things. And they may not necessarily, in most cases, know how to put it together for the reason why they're doing it. And some children will ask, well, Dad, why am I doing this? Mom, why am I doing this? Some children will ask. But by and large, we, as parents, we tell our children what to do. And it is so much also with society, the jobs that we're on. We've been told what to do. And so in most cases, we find ourselves being reactive, not necessarily knowing how to pause because we've been told what to do. And that in most cases, again, that reacting or that being reactive in situations, that really is in most cases the culprit, because for us, a lot of times as men, that's where the anger shows up through the reactive measures rather than pausing for a moment. And that pause is, again, as I mentioned, very, very powerful. Self-awareness. I love this piece here, self-awareness. This self-awareness is interesting because it takes critical thinking. It takes critical thinking. It takes us recognizing where we're at, being aware, being self-aware. Ideally, a lot of times, because we have all been raised or grown up in a reactive society, we're reactive rather than proactive. We, in most cases, can be told certain information, but until it happens, well, I don't want to be responding premature because it hasn't happened yet. I don't know what to do with this thing. And this is a society that we're all brought up in, more reactive rather than proactive. So what happens in this self-awareness piece is very interesting, very powerful, because the self-awareness is about us being aware of ourselves. But from a reactive standpoint of this wounded leader, hence really all of us to a degree until we come to a place of understanding, But from a reactive space of this wounded leader, he in most cases does not know how to hold himself accountable, because his reactions speak to the old mindset. His reactions, his personality is reactive. And so in most cases, that wounded leader, rather than pausing, he would be quick to place the blame on someone else or have an excuse for why he didn't do what he said he was going to do, or follow up on what he said he was going to do, or follow up on a decision that he had made. And in fact, when the decision was implemented, or the idea was implemented, he's now faced with the consequences of that decision. And in most cases, he doesn't take any personal responsibility for it. He doesn't know how to, because from this reactive standpoint, reactive nature, so to speak. Oh, hey guys, what is going on over on LinkedIn? I get so caught up in the conversation. What's going on, Michael, there? But give me a second here. Again, from that reactive leader, he gets so caught up, and again, being that the nature of of us as human beings, we're more reactive than proactive. And so in most cases, when that leader is dealing with a situation in response to a decision that he made as a leader, and now is dealing with the consequences that it didn't work out the way he thought it was going to work out. In most cases, that leader is going to be reactive. But now, from a healed perspective, we're talking about the second part of this is the shift now. He is taking accountability. And this is what the pause does. This pause is awesome, guys. I am not telling you something I'm just pulling out the hat here. I practice this pause often myself. This pause is just absolutely awesome. Hey, thanks for checking in, Coach Kerry Willis from Indiana. Hey, Kenneth, thank you for joining. Thank you, Mike, for joining. Also, Zakia. A few people there on LinkedIn and also on Substack. So thank you all for tuning in. So again, we've got the leader who is now shifting into a space of being more self-aware. He is practicing that big pause. And that big pause it's not a huge pause, but it's enough for us to pause to collect our thoughts. It's enough for us to pause and to tap into that critical thinking part of our minds. It's enough for us to tap into that space and look at the consequences. It's enough for us to pause, or at least when that pause is necessary, it allows us to feel. Because without the pause, it absolutely, me speaking personally, without the pause, it feels like I'm being pulled into some stuff. That's just how it is sometimes. So now that I practice more of the pause, I can decide to go with that or not. So without the pause, in most cases, I'm making that decision to be led by some other force. With the pause, I'm leading. And with the pause, you're leading. You're in charge. You're in control. You're mastering that thing. Because here's how it goes down. When we are not in charge of that thing, whether it be anger, whether it be jealousy, whether it be finding ourselves comparing ourselves to other people, when we're not in charge of that thing, whatever it might be, when we're not in charge of it, we're being led. When we're not in charge of it, we are serving it. Hence the pull that you and I might feel sometimes as we're being challenged in certain areas, or when we find ourselves being triggered. When we're not in charge, we're then triggered without the pause. With the pause, we can know that we're being triggered, make a decision to pause and think about it. Because in some cases, the people that we're talking to, they're not trying to trigger us. But because we're coming from that space of a wounded leader, what we hear is that person speaking to that narrative that we've created in our own head. And some instances, it might be true. The person is purposely trying to trigger us on something. But now with the pause, whether the person is intentional about trying to trigger us on some kind of situation, with the pause, we get to make the decision to be in control. So hopefully that makes sense, guys. There are lots of comments over here. Taking accountability, Coach Kerry Willis says, absolutely, taking accountability. So that's self-awareness. Now, healing. Healing as your superpower. Now, this is the integrated leadership. This is the work that I do with men. Because let's face it. Think about this now. When we're not healed or wounded, and a lot of us as men, we don't want to talk about, we don't like that word healed. But the reality of it is that when we're not healed, when we're wounded, dealing with past traumas or hurts and things of that nature, we're not good company. We don't make good husbands. We don't make good fathers. We don't make good leaders, because in most cases, nothing good comes out of it. That's the reality. In most cases, a wounded leader, nothing good comes out of it. Hurt people hurt people, even if it's not their intentions. Even if it's not their intentions. And in most cases, I don't believe it is their intentions. I think people are dealing with hurt on such deep levels, man. They're dealing with hurt and their traumas on such deep levels that it can appear to be intentional. But again, they've lost sight of clarity. They've lost sight of understanding. And it can be difficult to gain your footing back when you when you're carrying this major burden of being wounded. So I stated earlier, healing is a superpower, and this is what I work with men in. This is the space where I work with men in integrating leadership, because most men come to me fragmented, as I was once fragmented. I've been working in this space for the transformational space for nearly 30 years, but as a life coach for about 10 years. And so I've seen some things first with my own self. And this fragmentation, this fragmenting as a leader is in fact a part of life. No one starts off whole, but we have to be prepared to look at the signs. I think life in most cases giving many of us signs. Perhaps you've been in a relationship that has failed, and yet another relationship has failed, and perhaps yet another relationship has failed. And you can find yourself perhaps just saying, hey, you know what? I'm giving up on relationships. But at what point do we look at ourselves? At what point do we begin to look at all the pieces that we've left throughout our lives, the course of our lives? We left a part of ourselves here. We left a part of ourselves over here, and yet another part of ourselves over here. Hence, being fragmented. And so now we enter into relationships, be it as a leader, as a husband, as a father. We enter into relationships. We're having children out of this, because naturally, that which we have not mastered, it falls into the laps of our children. This is just a natural course, ladies and gentlemen. It now becomes something that our children have to tend with. And oftentimes as leaders, we talk about legacy. And that's a big word. It's a powerful word. It's an important word, because at the end of the day, I think many of us want to leave a legacy for our children. And not just financial, that helps too as well, but a legacy of understanding, a legacy of what I'm committed to, what you are committed to, that you're going to finish. A legacy of knowing that the things that I have not figured out, I'm going to do the work. And as a result, my children get to see that. And your legacy is not just about Coach Kerry Willis over here on LinkedIn says, do you believe what we don't master, it masters us? Absolutely. Absolutely. Coach Willis, I'm not sure what part of the conversation you came in on, but yeah, I said something very similar to that earlier. So absolutely, what you don't master or become to understand to the point where we can dismantle it, because oftentimes the things that we're not understanding, it can appear as this giant. And we can find ourselves running away, or trying to hide, go into hiding, because of this thing is appearing to be so much bigger than us, or the wounds, the things that we've gone through. But until we are prepared to dismantle those things from a constructive space, if you will, it becomes very difficult for us to overcome something that we have not mastered. And so, yeah, absolutely. That's very important. So as this integrated leader, we're now meshing the two from our personal lives. We're integrating our professional lives. Now, this work is not easy, ladies and gentlemen. It's not impossible, but it's not easy. You're not going to go through a drive-through and get the recipe ordered on the menu. Okay, Carrie says she's been here since the very beginning. So, guys, I do apologize if I'm not able to get to your comments and all of the things. Sometimes I get caught up in these conversations here. So, as I said, the integrated leadership, the integrated leader, it is the infusion of the things in most cases that he or she have decided to bury in some instances. To Carrie's point over here on LinkedIn, what you don't master will master you. Because what happens is that it obviously is going to show up in differently for each of us. The things that we may be dealing with as leaders, the unfinished work of our parents and their parents and so on and so on. I've spoken about this before as well. So well before, in most cases, that we're dealing with our own stuff, we're dealing with the stuff of our parents, grandparents, and their parents, and so on and so forth. So that ideally is the operating system that is kind of running the show in most cases. And it obviously is not, we're not very familiar with it in most cases, because how we see ourselves from that perspective is what we're dealing with. But as I said before, that's not our beginning. Our beginning was somewhere back there, somewhere down that lineage there. That's where our beginning was. And for the things that were not dealt with or healed, those different areas from a persona, our different personalities, those things are now have been placed in our lap. They made their way, and now we have to deal with them. And oftentimes I like to say that this is the valley that a lot of us are walking through unknowingly, or at least or afraid to walk through. I think Carl Jung calls it the shadow work. And this shadow work is absolutely important because when we don't do the work, the inner work, we'll forever be haunted by the things that we don't know. And again, to Carrie's point here over on LinkedIn, is that what we don't master, it will master us. Because in fact, that's the operating system that most of us are dealing with. I too have had to do the work. So again, I'm not telling you something that I'm pulling out the hat here. I've also had to do the work. It's absolutely essential to do the work, to see the progress in life here, to become that healed leader. Because naturally, as leaders, ladies and gentlemen, be it a father at home taking care of his children, husband taking care of his wife, our decisions or lack thereof essentially are a result of what we are dealing with right now, or their lack thereof. So it becomes very important for us to do the inner work, because most of what is given to us in life will be given to us out of relationships with people. And a lot of times this wounded leader, whoever he or she is, they will forego relationships. I've spoken about this pretty extensively. As leaders, oftentimes we're dealing with those accomplishments, and that feels good. But in most cases, we have forsaken relationships with people because in our own minds, they become difficult, or the people in building relationships become difficult, when in fact, a lot of times it's the very wounds that we're dealing with. It's the healing that has not taken place. And so we're looking through the lens, looking through the perspective of again, that story that we're telling ourselves. What we're continuously observing through the lens of that wounded person. And so again, it becomes very, very difficult to lead with clarity, to lead with understanding, to be a great leader. Where people are aspiring to become a leader like yourself. Perhaps that's not your aspiration, but the reality of it is that if it's not, we can find ourselves making more of the things that we don't like. We can find ourselves building the same or birthing or creating the same children, much like ourselves. So at some point, this integration right here, it has to be questioned. Those old systems that we find ourselves where they're not working, they have to be questioned. And often, not often enough, I should say, we don't question those things because they've worked for a time in a season. So we don't question those things. And when we don't question those things, that is ideally, typically, the very thing that ends up destroying us. Even last week, I did a live stream here. At least my regular Thursdays was doing a live stream, and I was all ready to go. And typically, I will go through the steps and making sure I'm doing my mic check and things of that nature. But here I had gotten comfortable. And the moment I got comfortable, what others may not see as a disaster, but from my perspective, I was like, oh man, geez. And so the point I'm making is that leaders have to continuously keep their eyes open, whether it be working with a live stream, video, whatever the case might be, but also as fathers, also as husbands, also as leaders of organizations. We have to be prepared to keep our eyes open. We have to be prepared to keep that flow going and not allow ourselves to be in a space where we're offended, because offense will absolutely interrupt the flow. And when the flow is interrupted, as I mentioned earlier, the traffic gets congested. And when the traffic gets congested, if you've ever been in congested traffic, perhaps on a highway or at a stoplight, maybe there was an accident in front of you. If you've ever been in congested traffic, and all of a sudden your flow had been interrupted because of this congested traffic, you know exactly what I mean. How it can get frustrating sitting in that congestion, even though you didn't cause it. But sitting in the congestion can get frustrating. And so as the integrated leader, going from the wounded leader to now the integrated leader, he has to be prepared to make some decisions. Because the idea is to integrate all of this stuff. That's the idea, is to integrate all of this stuff and picture or envision this stuff working together. And when it doesn't work together, in most cases, we don't know where the, hey, Jackie, hey, I think I mentioned Kenneth over there on LinkedIn. Thanks for stopping by, Jackie. So in most cases, as that leader, when we're integrating things that of the old and of the new, we're trying to put all these different things together. What happens is that we don't know where the flow has been interrupted. So, and in fact, it takes having conversations about that flow a lot of times. It takes having conversation about the congested traffic. Because rest assured, when the traffic is congested, someone's going to hear about it. And as leaders, we can end up destroying our children because of our wounds. We can end up destroying our spouse, our significant other because of the wounds. We can end up crushing team members that we're working with. All because we didn't want to do the work. And so there's a major price to pay and not wanting to do the work, because we no longer become part of the solution. We become part of the problem. We're still part of the problem. Now, this is absolutely why I love doing what I'm doing. Because when you are part of the, I like to say, the 1%ers and the way of the healed, because not everybody wants to take this journey, guys. I'm just face it. Everyone does not want to take this journey. Some people are going to get frustrated with my conversations or frustrated with other people's conversations as it relates to this healing stuff, these wounds. Some people are going to get absolutely frustrated to the point they don't want to hear it anymore. And that's perfectly okay. But the reality of it is that you're not going to know what it looks like to be healed. You're not going to know what it looks like to experience healthy relationships. Because what happens is that you and I, from a wounded space, we will have a tendency to draw back, draw away, push those people away. And from that lens, from that perspective on how we are seeing it, we're blaming everybody else. When in fact, it's the lens through which we're looking through. So again, not everybody wants to hear these conversations about healing, and that's perfectly okay. That's perfectly okay. But so you're not having an issue with the wounded leader that's leading you, or becoming the wounded leader that's leading others. You and I have to make a decision to get out of the rat race. We have to be prepared to make a decision to get out the rat race and know that there's more to life on the other side of those wounds, on the other side of the cuts and scrapes, the hurt, the trauma that we may be dealing with. There's people living life and actually enjoying it. So you and I as leaders, we've got to make a decision on regards to if this stuff, whether it coming from me or many other people who are talking in the same space, we have to make a decision if we're going to do something about it, or we're going to shut that conversation off and say, hey, I'm sick of hearing this guy. I'm sick of listening to her, whoever may be bringing that conversation. We have to be prepared to make a decision. And the last thing here, as I wrap it up here, is that I want to leave you with this thought here. And that thought is, your strength comes from your decision. Your strength comes from the decision that you and I will make. So whether you are at the, I'll give you a biblical reference, whether you are at the pool of Bethesda for nearly 38 years, dealing with a situation, whatever your situation might be, perhaps that's not your situation. Yeah, 38 years is a long time. But if you're over the age of 21, most of us know that time flies. So 38 years comes and goes just like that. So your strength is in the decision that you and I will make. And that's the only way that we're going to change the outcome. So if you are that wounded leader, you get to change the outcome by making a decision. So that being said, guys, I am going to wrap it up here and leave this with you. It is the link there to connect with me on my website to schedule a complimentary 30-minute strategy session with myself in relationship to this conversation or relationship to anything that you might want to talk about. Again, perhaps you are that wounded leader. This is not a judgment call towards you or anyone else, but it is an opportunity to sit down and get the stuff off your chest and talk with someone, meet with someone to help us to ease the congestion in the traffic. The link is on the screen, bit.ly/integrated leadership, I should say. Again, the information on the screen, bit.ly/integrated leadership. Check it out there, guys. And we'll say, let me look at the comments here really quick here. I know I've been on for a minute. And I do apologize, guys. Just got some great stuff here. Thank you, Kenneth. Savor the flavor. Thank you, brother, for being part of the conversation. Thank you, Mike, as well. Let's see. Thank you, Coach Carrie Willis. I appreciate you. Thank you, Jackie, for being part of the conversation as well. See the comments here. Looks like most of you are just kind of talking amongst each other. Mike says, time flies, get a fly swatter. Funny. So that being said, guys, got quite a few of you in here. Thank you, Preston, over on Substack for being part of the conversation. And OMG Mike over on YouTube. I'm not sure if that's Mike here on LinkedIn as well. Mike mentions scarcity mindset. That's a huge piece, and that comes from that wounded leader. That comes from that wounded leader. And to understand just really quick here from that wounded leader, it's not a one-time deal where he's wounded and he's just wounded. What happens is that there is an erosion that's taken place. I kind of touched bases on this earlier. His persona, the confidence begins to lack. The understanding is not clear anymore. He's not as confident. He can possibly come to a place where he's fearful, where he begins to doubt himself. So this erosion is absolutely very interesting because, as Mike says here over on YouTube, it's a scarcity mindset. So the scarcity mindset doesn't just show up just like that. It's where something is taken away from him. Not literally, but it feels like it's being taken away from him. And in fact, he has been taken away because he's been distracted by the very thing that's pulling and tugging at him, the very thing that he had to feed, the very thing that he's now serving. Because whether it's anger, whether it's lack of confidence, we as leaders end up serving those things. We as leaders end up feeding those things. As a kid, we would play the video games. We'd have our quarter at the top of the video game. And the more quarters that we had up there, obviously the busier the game was, but it was like feeding that monster. And the more you fed it, the more it pulled you away with the lack of confidence, with the erosion of our mindset. The more we feed those things from the scarcity, from the fear, the more we are pulled away from the very source of who we are, and we lose our identity. So that being said, guys, I hope that makes a lot of sense. Let's see here. Kenneth, thank you, man. I appreciate you. Thank you, Kenneth. Kenneth says, you're funny, Kenneth. Tonight's monologue is so delectable, scrumptious, scrumptiously, deliciously edible, and tasty good. I appreciate you, Kenneth. Thank you, man. Over on LinkedIn. Dana Booker, thank you for joining, Dana. Dana says, scarcity mindset leading to rumination and back to scarcity mindset. Again, cycle. Thanks for naming this. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, that scarcity mindset is no joke. Mike says over here on YouTube here, just going to be the last comment, guys. I'm going to wrap it up here. I don't want to take too much of your time here. Mike here says on YouTube, it is perceived lack of choice, lack of healing plays into fear, which in turn causes us to think we don't have agency. Absolutely, Michael. Absolute, Mike. Absolutely. Yeah. It is. Ultimately, it is a matter of perception. Absolutely. That's powerful in itself. It is absolutely a matter of perception, and it's not necessary that it's being taken away from us. It is a perception. It's perceived that it's been taken away from us because there is the law of where things are diminishing. Things are diminishing. It can appear that the light's going out. Again, a matter of perspective. So that being said, guys, quite a few of you over here on LinkedIn, thank you for joining on LinkedIn. So I appreciate you. And again, once more, thank you for joining over on Substack. Preston, thank you. OG Mike 0007 over on LinkedIn. Love that name. And we'll say good night, guys. And again, as I mentioned, check me out if you are a man who is leading from that wounded space. And again, this is definitely not a judgment call by any stretch of the imagination. We've all been there. So if that is you, again, check me out there. The link that I placed on the screen, bit.ly/integrated leadership. Would love to connect with you and see if this works for you as well. So we will talk with you soon, guys, and we'll say goodbye for now. Bye-bye.